On the afternoon of October 18th, 1994, in Tippecanoe County, Indiana, a farmer named Doug Fenwick watched his $340,000 John Deere combine sink to its axles in the northwest corner of his home field and understood that the worst had happened at the worst possible time. The weather forecast said rain, not a chance of rain, not a possibility of rain. Rain. 2 inches starting Thursday evening, which was 36 hours away. Doug had 80 acres of standing corn in that northwest corner, corn that had been waiting for the ground to firm up enough to support the combine's weight, corn that needed to come out before Thursday, or it was not coming out at all. Early October had been wet, the kind of wet that soaked down past the topsoil and stayed in the subsoil for weeks, the kind of wet that made the low corners of flat Indiana fields into soft traps that would swallow a heavy machine if you pushed it too soon. Doug had pushed it. He had seen 2 dry days and calculated that was enough. He had been wrong by maybe 48 hours, wrong enough that his combine, a machine that weighed 36,000 pounds empty and considerably more with a full grain tank, had worked the first 50 acres of the cornfield before the ground gave up and the right rear tire broke through the crust and the machine began to settle. He had tried to drive out. The left side had gone down trying. Now the combine sat in the northwest corner with both rear tires buried past the axle housing, grain still in the tank, the header folded up. Useless! The grain in that field was worth $64,000 at current prices. The combine was worth $340,000. The wrecker service that specialized in heavy equipment extraction had quoted Doug a minimum of $8,000 to get the machine out, and they were booked until Friday. Friday was after the rain. Doug stood at the edge of the field with his phone in his hand and looked at what 36 hours meant in real terms. He had no other combine available. Custom harvesters in the county were all working. Equipment rental was a 6-hour minimum wait for anything that could handle corn. The grain elevator would not take wet corn above 15.5% moisture without a steep drying penalty. He was out of options that he could see. He turned around and looked down the township road to the east, the way a man looks when he is running out of places to look. He could see the Hatch farm from where he was standing. Merle Hatch's white farmhouse and red barn a quarter-mile down the road. He had driven past that farm twice a day for 20 years without thinking much about it. Merle Hatch farmed 280 acres with equipment that Doug had privately considered a study in how not to modernize. Every time Doug drove past and saw the old red Farmall parked beside the machine shed or the ancient 2-row corn picker under the implement roof, he felt the mild, comfortable satisfaction of a man who knows he is running things the right way. Now, he looked at that farm for different reasons, because 3 weeks ago he had driven past slowly and seen Merle work in the wet northwest corner of his own property with the old Farmall and the 2-row picker, slow and methodical. The thought that had crossed Doug's mind was the same thought it always was when he saw old equipment working slowly. Why would anyone do it that way? He was about to find out why. Let me tell you about Merle Hatch, because you need to understand the man before you can understand what his father built into the farm. Merle was 68 years old in the fall of 1994. He had farmed the same 280 acres in Tippecanoe County his entire adult life taking over from his father Raymond in 1968. The farm was good, flat Indiana corn ground, the kind of ground that looked from the road like it was all the same. All flat, all black, all equal. It was not all equal. Merle knew where every variation was. Every slight depression that held water 2 weeks longer than the surrounding field. Every subsoil clay pan that slowed drainage, every gentle rise that drained first and could carry a machine when everything around it could not. He knew these things because Raymond had taught him, and Raymond had taught him because he had spent 40 years learning them the way you learn things when your livelihood depends on not being wrong. Raymond Hatch had farmed this ground from 1928 to 1968. 40 years of Tippecanoe County corn and beans through every kind of year Indiana weather could produce. He had learned what the soil in those low corners did in a wet October, the way a navigator learns shallow water, not from a chart, but from running aground once and making sure it never happened again. In October of 1951, Raymond's neighbor to the west, a man named Caldwell, who had just bought a brand-new self-propelled combine, one of the first in the county, had pushed his machine into a wet, low corner 3 days too soon and lost it to the mud. The rain had come before the machine could be pulled out. The standing corn in that corner had gone unharvested, lodged and rotting by November. Caldwell had lost $2,800 worth of corn, a significant sum in 1951, along with several weeks of downtime and a repair bill he had not budgeted for. Raymond had watched all of it from across the fence line. He had thought about it through the following winter. He already owned the 1939 Farmall H. He had bought it used in 1944 for $180. The H was a small tractor, not his primary machine, but he kept it for odd jobs and the specific task that had made him grateful for it every wet fall since 1944. The H weighed 2,900 pounds. The self-propelled combines coming onto the market in the early 1950s weighed 10 times that. In the spring of 1952, Raymond found a 1947 New Idea 2-row corn picker at an estate auction in Lafayette for $95. He bought it, pulled it home behind the Farmall H, and put it under the implement roof beside the barn. His wife asked what he planned to do with it. Raymond had looked at the low northwest corner of the home field, soft and wet in the April thaw. "Pick corn with it," he said, "when the ground won't hold anything heavier." Raymond used the combination every wet October for 16 years. The Farmall H, with the 2-row picker, moved through soft, wet ground that would have buried anything heavier, because the machine's total weight, tractor and loaded picker together, came in under 6,500 pounds. It was slow. 2 rows instead of 8. Maybe 12 acres a day on good wet ground, 8 on bad. But it picked. In a wet October, when the big machines were parked at the field edge, waiting for ground that might firm up or might not, the old Farmall picked corn. Merle had grown up working those wet corners every fall that warranted it. He had learned the machine the way he learned everything his father knew, by doing it until Raymond could no longer do it. When Raymond retired in 1968, the Farmall and the picker went with the farm. Merle kept them both running for 26 more years. The same annual maintenance, the same use when the wet years required it. He had never explained this to Doug Fenwick. There was nothing to explain. It was simply what you did with soft, wet ground when you had the right machine for it. Now let me tell you about the conversation at the fence line. Doug walked down the township road to Merle's farm. He did not take his truck. He walked the way a man walks when he is not sure of his reception and wants to arrive without announcement. He found Merle at the machine shed, greasing the wheel bearings on the corn picker in preparation for the following day's work. Merle looked up when Doug came around the corner of the shed. He waited. "I have got a problem," Doug said. Merle took his glasses off and cleaned them on his shirt. He put them back on. "I know you do," he said. "I could see the combine from my field this afternoon." Doug nodded. 80 acres in the northwest corner, rain Thursday evening. "I know about the rain," Merle said. "I need to get those 80 acres out before Thursday." Doug looked at the Farmall, the picker. He looked at Merle. "I have been driving past this farm for 20 years, he said. "Every time I see that setup, I think—" He stopped. I thought it did not make much sense. Merle waited. Doug looked at the old equipment. "I was wrong about that." Merle looked at the picker. "Why, it does not make much sense is that it is slow," he said. 2 rows, maybe 12 acres a day. On soft ground, maybe 8. He paused. "That is the only thing it is not. Everything else about it is exactly right for what you need." Doug calculated. 80 acres at 8 to 12 acres a day. He did not have 8 days. He had 36 hours. "My son Calvin is available," Merle said. "He farms his own place over on 9th Street Road and has his own combine. I can call him tonight. He can take the firm acres once your machine is recovered. We take the wet corner with this." Doug stared at him. "You would do that?" Merle looked at him with the mild surprise of a man who does not understand why the question is being asked. "You have got 80 acres of corn that needs to come out before Thursday," he said. "I have got the equipment to work the wet ground." He paused. "You are my neighbor." Doug did not say anything for a moment. He looked at the worn orange Farmall, the ancient picker beside it, the fresh grease on the wheel bearings Merle had just applied. "My father used to say I should keep a light tractor for the wet corners," Doug said quietly. "I sold everything when I took over. Said it was inefficient." Merle nodded once. He had heard this before, from different men on different farms in different years, the knowledge that gets sold off with the old equipment. "Come back in an hour," Merle said. "I will have the farm all ready. Let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been completely certain you were doing things the right way for so long that the certainty stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like a fact? Have you ever watched someone else do something slowly with old equipment and felt that comfortable confidence that you were more efficient, more modern, more capable, and then watched one wet October take all of it apart in an afternoon? Doug Fenwick had been that certain man for 20 years. He had 1,200 acres and a $340,000 combine and GPS guidance and yield mapping and precision application and every tool precision agriculture could provide. He had never had a harvest go wrong in a way he could not handle with the equipment he owned until the ground gave out under his axles and 36 hours of dry weather stood between him and $64,000 worth of corn that needed a machine weighing less than 7,000 pounds to reach it. There is a specific kind of education that cannot be bought and cannot be rushed. It requires the right conditions, the right timing, and, in Doug Fenwick's case, a wet, northwest corner and a neighbor who had spent 26 years maintaining equipment that most people had told him was not worth the shed space. That education was about to begin. Let me tell you about the next 32 hours, because that is where the story is told without words. Merle had the Farmall and picker ready at 4 in the afternoon. He had refueled the tractor, checked the picker chains, adjusted the gathering points, and hooked up with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done it every fall for 26 years. Calvin had driven over from 9th Street Road and was parked in the farm lane with his combine, ready to work the firm acres once Doug's machine was recovered. They went in at 4:15, Merle driving, Doug walking the outside row watching the picker for plugging. There was a moment about 20 minutes into the first pass when Doug stopped walking and simply stood and watched the Farmall work. The tractor moved through the wet ground at a pace his combine could not have matched even when the ground was solid, because the combine was built for speed and efficiency over large acreage, not for patience and grip on marginal ground. The Farmall moved the way a machine moves when it was built with a different purpose from speed. Its narrow profile let it thread between the low, wet spots. Its lightweight let it float on ground that had given up supporting anything heavier. The rear tires gripped without spinning because the machine was not asking too much of the soil beneath them. The picker did what pickers do: slow, mechanical, certain. 2 rows at a time, the ears rolling up the gathering chains and through the snapping rolls, the corn falling clean into the wagon behind. Doug watched it and thought about his grandfather's letter. He had not thought about that letter in 20 years. His grandfather had farmed with a 2-row picker in the 1940s and had written to Doug's father about the specific virtue of light equipment on wet ground. A letter Doug had read in 1974 when he was 24 and beginning to think about farming seriously. He had read it and decided his grandfather's era was over. The northwest corner was telling him something different. They worked until 9 that evening. When the lights failed on the picker, the wiring was original 1947 and not reliable after dark, Merle shut the machine down and they walked back to the farmhouse. Calvin's combine had been working the drier ground since 6 and had taken another 40 acres off the firm sections of the field. Merle's wife had supper on the table. Doug sat down at a stranger's kitchen table and ate without being asked if he wanted to, because Merle's wife had been feeding harvest crews for 40 years and did not ask. "How much did we take today?" Doug asked. Merle poured coffee. 23 acres on the wet ground, he said. Calvin got 42 on the firm. He did the arithmetic without pausing. That leaves 15 acres on the wet ground, and we have tomorrow. "We will finish it," Merle said. "Weather is still Thursday evening." He looked at Doug over the rim of his cup. "Get some sleep." They started at first light the following morning. The remaining 15 wet acres went in 8 hours. Calvin finished the last of the firm ground before noon. By 2 in the afternoon on October 19th, all 80 acres of the northwest cornfield were harvested. The corn was in the wagons. The wagons were at the elevator. The rain started Thursday evening, as forecast, right on time, as if it had been waiting for permission. If you want to know what Doug Fenwick said when he came back to the Hatch farm the following week, and what he asked Merle to show him, subscribe to The Honest Farmer. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Tell me if your family ever kept old equipment for a reason that everyone else said made no sense. The wrecker got the combine out on Saturday. It cost $9,200. The hydraulics needed $4,400 in repairs. Doug's total unexpected expense from the wet corner incident was $13,600. The grain from the 80 acres, all of it in at dry moisture, sold for $63,800. Doug sat with those numbers for a week. Then he drove to the Hatch farm. Merle was in the machine shed, pulling the canvas over the picker for winter storage. Same canvas, same machine, same ritual Raymond had established, and Merle had continued for 45 years. Doug parked and walked to the shed. "What do I owe you?" he asked. "Nothing," Merle said. "Same as always with neighbors." Doug shook his head. "Merle, 2 days of your time and your son's combine. Calvin's combine was his own business. You would need to ask him about that." He looked at Doug. "My time and my machine cost you nothing." He paused. "You would have done the same." Doug was not entirely sure that was true. He was not sure he was the kind of man Merle was describing. He thought he might be becoming it. He looked at the canvas-covered picker. "My grandfather wrote a letter," Doug said, "about light equipment on wet ground. He wrote it in 1948 after a bad October. I thought he was showing me history." Merle cleaned his glasses. "He was showing you something else." Doug looked at the canvas. "I know that now." Merle walked to the Farmall and began wiping the engine down with a shop rag, the postseason wipe that was the last step before winter. The same routine Raymond had done, the same tractor. "How long have you had this machine?" Doug asked. Merle thought about it. "My father bought it, used in 1944. He paused. 50 years. Doug nodded. He was doing a different kind of arithmetic than he usually did. Not yield-mapping arithmetic or input-cost arithmetic. Arithmetic about what knowledge costs and how long it takes to accumulate and what you lose when you sell it off with the equipment that carries it. "What would you sell it for?" he asked. The setup. Farmall and picker. Merle stopped wiping and looked at him. "Not for sale." "I know." Doug held up his hand. "I am asking because I want to know what you think it is worth." Merle looked at the tractor, then at the picker, then at Doug. He cleaned his glasses. "My father spent 42 years learning the wet corners of this farm," he said. "I spent 26 years learning them after him." He looked at Doug. "That is 68 years of knowing where the machine needs to go and how fast and when to stop and when to push." He paused. "You cannot buy that, not the machine and not the knowledge." Doug nodded slowly. He looked at the Farmall. "My father told me to keep a light tractor," he said. "I did not listen." Merle went back to wiping the engine. "Most men do not," he said. "Not until they need it." Doug drove home. He called his equipment dealer that evening and asked about small used tractors with low ground pressure. The dealer laughed, the comfortable laugh of a man who sells large equipment to large operations. "Doug," he said, "you are farming 1,200 acres. What do you need a small tractor for?" Doug thought about the northwest corner. He thought about 36 hours and 8 acres a day, and an old man with thick-framed glasses who had been maintaining a 1939 Farmall for reasons Doug had considered insufficient every time he drove past the farm. "Wet corners," Doug said. "I need it for the wet corners." Let me tell you about the years after, because this story does not end at a machine shed door. Doug found a 1952 Farmall Super M at an estate auction in Warren County the following spring. He paid $800. He bought a 1949 New Idea two-row corn picker from a retired farmer in White County for $350. He spent the summer learning to maintain both pieces and asking Merle questions that Merle answered the way Raymond had answered his questions, directly, without embellishment, the way you answer when you know something completely and want someone else to know it too. Doug's hired man, Travis, 28 years old and raised on modern equipment, asked why Doug was putting time into a 60-year-old two-row picker when the farm had a $340,000 combine. Because the combine weighs 36,000 pounds, Doug said, and the picker weighs 6,000. He looked at Travis. On wet ground, that is the only number that matters. Travis nodded slowly. He did not fully understand yet. He would eventually, in the way all farmers understand what matters most, from the year the ground refuses to cooperate and the equipment that looked like it, made no sense, turns out to be the only thing left that does. In the fall of 1997, a wet October came to Tippecanoe County. Not as bad as 1994, but bad enough. Doug's northwest corner was soft enough that he pulled the combine off it after 2 hours and sent Travis to get the Super M and the picker. Travis spent 4 days working the wet acres. He did not complain once. He told Doug at the end of the 4th day that he understood now about the weight and the ground and why you kept something slow and light when everything else was fast and heavy. Doug nodded. He thought about Merle. He thought about Raymond. He thought about his grandfather's letter, which he had gone to find in a box in the attic after October 1994, which he had read 3 times and then kept on his desk where he could see it. The letter was 23 lines long. His grandfather had written it in November of 1948 after a wet October on ground that sounded exactly like the northwest corner. The last line read, "Keep something light for the years when the ground won't hold what you think it should." 23 lines. His grandfather had understood it in 1948. Doug had needed until 1994 to hear it. Let me tell you the last thing, because it is the thing Raymond Hatch would have wanted you to know. Merle Hatch retired from farming in 2001 at the age of 75. His son David took over the 280 acres and continued the operation exactly as Merle had run it, including the annual maintenance on the 1939 Farmall and the 1947 picker. Merle had never suggested selling them. David had never considered it. The Farmall is 85 years old now. The picker is 77. They are both in the machine shed under the same implement roof where Raymond put them. David greases the picker chains every September, the same September ritual Raymond established, and Merle continued and David inherited without being asked. He just continued it because it was the right thing to do, with equipment that has proven itself and has not finished proving itself yet. Doug Fenwick came to the Hatch farm one more time in the fall of 2005 to show his son Tyler, 22 and just beginning to farm alongside him, the Farmall and the picker. He walked Tyler through the machine the way Merle had walked him through it in the summer of 1995. Tyler asked why they were learning the maintenance on someone else's machine. "Because someday," Doug said, "you're going to need to know how one of these works." He looked at the Farmall, and when that day comes, you need to already know. David Hatch stood in the shed doorway watching Doug explain his family's machine to Doug's son. He thought about Merle explaining it to Doug. He thought about Raymond explaining it to Merle. 4 men, 3 generations, the same machine, the same knowledge moving from hand to hand the way knowledge moves when people are paying attention to the right things. The northwest corner is still the softest ground on the Hatch farm. David knows exactly where it starts and exactly where it ends, and exactly how many dry days it takes before it will hold a modern combine. In the years when it takes too long and the rain is coming, he pulls the Farmall out and hooks up the picker and goes in slow and methodical and certain, the way Raymond went in and Merle went in. And that is simply how that corner gets harvested. The combine does 600 acres a day. The old picker does 8. On the northwest corner in a wet October, the combine does nothing. The picker does everything. Subscribe to The Honest Farmer for more stories like this one. Stories about the equipment that gets kept past the point where anyone can explain why. That proves itself in the one year when nothing else will work. About the knowledge that travels from father to son in a machine shed on a September morning. About the farmers who understood that efficiency means getting the crop in, not having the biggest machine. Hit the bell so you do not miss the next one. Tell me in the comments, did your family ever keep a piece of old equipment specifically for a situation that everyone else said would never come? The Farmall is still in the shed. The picker is beside it. The canvas is on for winter. Some equipment is not inefficient. It is efficient for a specific problem that only comes once every few years. The farmers who understand that keep the equipment ready. The farmers who do not understand it learn it the hard way in 36 hours, in the mud of a wet October corner with rain on the way. Raymond Hatch understood it in 1952. It took Doug Fenwick until 1994 to get there. The ground was patient. It waited for him.